Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. You should be able to see my new share right now. We appreciate you being here this morning. I'm just pulling up my notes here to kick us off. So thank you very much. I am Bree Kruder. I am the Executive Vice President of ProLink Solutions. I'm so happy to have you with us today for our conference. I'm going to be hosting our first session to kick us off. Welcome to day one of our ProLink Technology Live Conference 2023. This is our traditional annual user conference, but we've rebranded it to be a little more appealing for the general industry. And we now offer, this is now our third annual conference virtually. So we're hosting a user group prior to our virtual event for many years in person. And so this is our third year offering more of a virtual training conference, and it has been such a wonderful experience and something we plan to continue indefinitely. So thank you very much for being here. We have sessions with industry topics today beyond just software training. Plus, the event is open to all public agencies nationally, and you will have the opportunity to casually interact with your peers throughout the conference. This year, we have a mix of pre-recorded and live sessions. All sessions today are live. There's one pre-recorded session tomorrow, which is what's new and what's coming for ProLink HFA. The audience in attendance today includes both ProLink customers and non-customers, affiliates and members of our industry in affordable housing. Just multifamily folks this year. So we're not the last couple of years, we did multiple tracks with the Homeowner Assistance Fund and other products that we support across the industry. This year is just our multifamily track of training. So kind of similar business lines across our audience. And we've designed this conference to really encourage participation. So except for this session, with the exception of this session, you will see polls built into each session to kind of generate some discussion and engage you throughout the conference. Also, we have coffee and bagel. So we have a social kind of interaction opportunity. We have 15-minute breaks between our sessions. And then during that time, you saw the video when you logged in here regarding coffee and bagel. That's kind of our opportunity to gather in a room and spend some time together. That short video is available on the main page at the bottom with a Starbucks gift card you'll see at the bottom of your homepage on Cvent on the conference platform. And it explains how to participate in coffee and bagel each day. And then we will post to social media using the hashtag ProLinkTechLive23 over the next couple of days. So keep an eye on that as well. The session you have just joined is titled Keynote Washington Update. The speakers for this session are myself and Stockton Williams, the Executive Director of National Council of State Housing Agencies. Thank you, Stockton, very much for being here. Before we start this session, I'd like to take a few minutes to cover some of our housekeeping items. Okay, so first on the right-hand side, this is a zoomed kind of view of what you see on your screen. So on the right-hand side of the screen within the session that you've joined, you'll have access to that chat feature. And just by clicking on that chat icon on the right-hand side, you can begin chatting with your fellow attendees. So just keep that in mind. Please feel free to post any questions or comments throughout the session in the chat, and we will try our best to provide responses or follow up individually after the session. So depending on what you're asking about, we'll certainly address that. Please note there are posts, your posts are visible to everybody in the audience as well. All attendees can see those questions, which is great because I'm sure a lot of people will have the same questions and thoughts. Many sessions for ProLink Technology Live will have poll questions, like I said before. Several of them do and some may not, so just be aware of that as well and participate as you can. And then the next slide here, this little circle around resources, this is where you can download copies of the material for each session. So within the session, again, the session page that you're joining now, there's a resources link. That's where you can access the materials. We're sharing materials for all of our sessions. And then you can download them anytime before, during, or after that session. Okay, we also wanted to inform you that we're offering sessions this year. I'm really excited about this, but in addition to the sessions that we are offering live, we are also offering sessions from previous ProLink Technology Live conferences on demand. So the nice thing about that is if there is a session scheduled live over the next couple of days that may not speak to your needs, please take a minute to look through some of the videos we have available from the last 2 years of conferences. If you've carved out the time to attend here, it's a great opportunity to take advantage and learn some of the other areas of ProLink HFA that we may not cover live this conference. If you scroll down on the conference platform homepage, you will see playlists and individual sessions for both 2022 and 2021 ProLink Tech Live conferences. And they're supplemental to the live sessions, like I said before. So you can certainly watch them in lieu of a live session, or after. You'll have access to these as well. So please take advantage of that and see if any of those might be helpful for your teams. Now, Stockton, I'm ready to pass this off to you. So thank you very much. And you can take it away. I'm going to be controlling your slides for you. And again, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, Bree. Thank you. I spoke to this virtual event a couple of years ago, and Jennifer Schwartz, my colleague from NCSHA, represented us last year. So when you invited one of us to do it this time, we both jumped at it, but I jumped first. So it's great to be back, and I want to say hello to what I understand is a substantial number of state housing finance agency staff from so many agencies around the country who are joining. ProLink is not only known to all of you on the call for the firm's services to Housing Finance Agency, but also is just a tremendous supporter of NCSHA in a lot of different ways. And we're just incredibly grateful to the entire ProLink team for their active participation. It helps us do what we do, which is support the amazing work of state housing finance agencies around the country. So I was invited to kick off this year's conference with an update on what's going on in Washington, affecting the key programs and policies for housing finance agencies. And so I'll run through that relatively quickly, and we'll have some time at the end to take a few questions in the chat. And my slides will be available. We're happy to share them afterwards with anybody who's interested, so don't feel like you have to squint or take notes on every single thing that comes up on the screen. We can go to the next slide, please, Bree. So most of what I want to discuss is probably what's top of mind for many of you who are paying attention to what's going on here in Washington, and that's what is going to happen in Congress and the federal agencies over the next 6 to 8 weeks from now until the end of this year and into early January. And, you know, the top line answer is there's just a lot of uncertainty, but we are starting to see the outlines of some of what's going to be most important for housing. And as always, when we talk about the legislative front at NCSHA, we're really looking at two major areas of activity on Capitol Hill. One is the tax area in the committees in Congress that write tax legislation. And the other is the appropriations area, the committees in Congress that do all of the funding of federal agencies and programs. There is a third area, which is where policies get made in the banking committees. There's less going on in those committees at the moment than there sometimes is. So I'm going to talk mainly about the tax and appropriations picture for the remainder of this year. So I'll talk about the fiscal year 2024 appropriations bills, and I'll talk about NCSHA's signature legislative priority, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. This is a bill that I suspect everyone on the call has heard about, and many of you know a great deal about. It's legislation that NCSHA has been pushing for a number of years that would make a significant expansion of the low-income housing tax credit that I'll get into. There are some other important tax issues that could come up in the latter weeks of this year as well. They include potential fixes to the qualified contract and right of first refusal provisions of the low-income housing tax credit statute, some additional tax credits for states that have been heavily impacted by disasters in the last year or so, certainly including Florida and Hawaii, among a number of others, and potentially a new tax credit modeled on the low-income housing tax credit for the construction and rehabilitation of single-family owner-occupied homes, called the Neighborhood Homes Tax Credit. But let's jump back big picture and talk for just a minute about the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. If we could go to the next slide. As I mentioned, this bill is probably familiar to many of you. This is the big affordable housing supply bill. This Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act would make a number of expansions and improvements to the housing credit program, which of course is the most important and effective federal program for the creation and preservation of affordable rental housing. On the screen here, I won't read. There are several of the most important provisions. You can see lowering the so-called 50% test for bond financing, enabling basis boosts, basically higher credit amounts for projects that serve particularly needy communities and people, tweaks to the program to make it work better for preservation and comply with other federal laws. Bottom line, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, if it were enacted in whole, would be a massive increase in the resources that state housing finance agencies have through the low-income housing tax credit program to support housing credit production and preservation. Hundreds of thousands of additional units over the next several years. Next slide, please. So the good news, and it's remarkable news, and it's a tribute to the hard work of NCSHA's terrific government affairs team, but more than that, it's a tribute to the housing finance agencies, those of you on this call and many, many others in the HFA network who have built incredible support in Congress for the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. You can see these numbers, large numbers of Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate, including members on those two key committees I mentioned that write all of the tax bills, are co-sponsors of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. And if you look at the ideological spectrum of Congress, from the most conservative to the most progressive, you'll find members at all points of that continuum are co-sponsors of this bill. You'll find some of the most long-serving members and some of the newest. Virtually every type of member of Congress, every conceivable district, part of the country, housing market, has co-sponsorship of, is a co-sponsor of this legislation. So it is a remarkable showing of bipartisan support. It's not exactly common these days for Republicans and Democrats to agree so overwhelmingly and so wholeheartedly on something, but they do when it comes to expanding the low-income housing tax credit. The other thing that's really positive and encouraging is that the two top Republicans and the two top Democrats in charge of the tax committees in the House and Senate are big supporters of the low-income housing tax credit program, and they are absolutely hopeful. They've spoken publicly about their desire to put together some type of small tax bill, not huge tax cuts, but more targeted tax provisions to extend some important breaks that have expired that both sides care about, and potentially do a few new and additional things that both sides want. And low-income housing tax credit is right at the front of the line for consideration there. So if there is some sort of year-end tax bill, we feel like at least some of the provisions in the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, specifically reducing the 50% test for bond financing, and potentially a few of the other expansions of the housing credit that are in the Credit Improvement Act really do have a good chance of getting enacted. Now, I say that with full disclosure that I said the same thing last year, and I've said the same thing several times in other years recently. We've been here before, feeling like we're doing everything right, and on the precipice, or at least close to a remarkable legislative victory, and it hasn't happened. Not because of any problem in our strategy or any opposition to our bill, but just because of the broader political dynamics that have prevented action on a tax vehicle over the last several Congresses. So we can't take anything for granted. We got to keep building co-sponsorship support. And so that's what we're going to do. We'll let everybody know when it's time to rally once more to make a last push. But many of your executive directors, federal liaisons are actively working as we speak to try to make these numbers even more overwhelming and compelling. So if there's any opportunity at all, and if there is, it'll be probably in late December, as has been the pattern, to advance this critically important legislation, we want to be in the best position to do so. Next slide, please. So this is one that you'll want to print if you're interested, and it summarizes where the House and Senate are on all of the key HUD programs in the appropriations process for this current fiscal year. As I'm sure most of you know, the federal fiscal year starts October 1. Congress has only passed appropriations bills a few times by the start of the new fiscal year in the last number of decades. So we have this annual ritual of extending funding for short-term periods and eventually getting the work done for the rest of the fiscal year later in the fall, and sometimes in as late as late December or even early January. The big issue, of course, that's overhanging the appropriations process this year is that the continuing resolution, the temporary stopgap funding bill that's currently in effect, expires on November 17th. Of course, that was one of the contentious issues that led to all the turmoil in the House of Representatives and multiple efforts by members to win the House speakership. That's now been resolved. The House Speaker has been elected. Representative Johnson is now working with his members and the Democrats in the House to some extent, and really the Democrats in the Senate to figure out a path forward for the appropriations bills for this year. The Senate has been moving a little more efficiently, a little faster and more efficiently so far. And actually, just late yesterday, the Senate passed its version of the HUD funding bill for this fiscal year 2024. And, you know, it's pretty good. All things considering, it certainly doesn't have the increases to the home program and some other priorities that NCSHA and housing finance agencies tend to focus on. But many programs are held steady. Some have received incremental increases. There is some analysis that because of rising inflation and the way HUD has to account for the cost of housing vouchers, the Senate bill may actually underfund several thousand vouchers that wouldn't be able to be renewed. And that's something we're watching carefully. But the bill does generally maintain funding at current levels for important HUD programs, and that's positive. This Senate bill also does have some very good legislative language that NCSHA has worked on for a number of months with many of you to strengthen and improve HUD's process for handling the project-based contract administration of Section 8 assistance. This is a technical issue that if your agency doesn't have this administrative responsibility, you don't need to worry about. But if it does, you know what I'm talking about. PBCA has been a very contentious administrative and regulatory issue for NCSHA and HUD. And we are hoping to get resolution to the most difficult issues through the legislative process this year. The Senate bill has some very good language that we have worked on to do that. Now, that's obviously only half the equation because the House has to pass its version of the bill, and then the House and Senate have to compromise. The House hasn't yet passed a HUD funding bill. The version that has emerged from the key committee in the House does have significant cuts to some HUD programs, particularly the home program. The House bill would cut home by $1 billion, 67%, an absolutely devastating reduction of one of the most important HUD programs. We're very concerned about that and really pushing back hard and trying to make sure that whatever the House and Senate agree to on home is much closer to the Senate number at a minimum than what the House has proposed. The House also would significantly reduce the funding available to renew existing Section 8 vouchers, which is another big problem. So it's really unclear what the path forward for the appropriations bills in the House is going to be. It doesn't look like there's any real interest among the House Republicans in brinksmanship around an actual government shutdown, which is a good thing. Our sense is, though, that they will stick to pretty significant cuts in the appropriations bills that they gradually pass and then sit down with the Senate to negotiate. So we expect that will start to happen over the next several weeks, and it does look like the HUD bill will be one of the first ones that gets acted on. So a lot of work to do there and some uncertainty. We'll certainly keep you all in the loop as the process plays out. Next slide, please. Shifting gears a little bit, I just wanted to make everyone aware of one of the most consequential regulatory actions that federal agencies have taken in a while related to housing and mortgage finance and community development. And that was the release a couple of weeks ago by the 3 federal bank regulators of brand new regulations for the Community Reinvestment Act. This is the first time since 1995 that the Community Reinvestment Act regulations have been revised. CRA is obviously the driver of federally insured depositories, lending and equity investment and service delivery in low-income areas. It's been a critical law that, while it doesn't directly affect housing finance agencies, does absolutely directly affect the flow of private capital from insured depositories, big banks and small, that lend and invest in affordable housing and other activities in lower income communities all over the country. NCSHA has made a lot of progress analyzing this new regulation. It's 1,600 pages. So anyone who says they've figured everything out and answered every question they have may not be completely straight with you. We're really looking through it in detail to see every nuance and potential implication for housing finance agencies. But in the main, having done several rounds of preliminary analysis, this rule is a step forward. The regulators did listen to a lot of the feedback that NCSHA and other organizations representing affordable housing interests put forward in the comment process. We didn't get everything we were seeking, but we pushed back on some of the more problematic aspects of the rule when the regulators first proposed it. So, for example, the proposed version of the rule would have given less weight in the evaluation, the examination of banks under the Community Reinvestment Act for their investing activities, things like buying low-income housing tax credits or new markets tax credits. The new rule, the final version that came out a couple weeks ago, fixes that problem and gives those kinds of activities generally equal weight to some of the other things that banks can do to also get credit under the CRA. Next slide, please. There are also a whole bunch of very important changes in the rule that deal with the geographic areas where banks can get credit for under the Community Reinvestment Act. CRA really started as a federal policy to combat redlining by banks. It's always been very much a place-based regulation that looks at where banks have branches and says in those markets, banks have to serve the credit needs of all of the consumers who live there. But nowadays, of course, with banking being done virtually and on a nationwide basis, the regulators really had to think about how banks could get CRA credit for activities that are outside of those markets where they have a direct physical presence. And the rule seems to do a pretty good job of that. The rule takes effect January 1st, 2026. That's actually fairly soon for something that's complicated. It has massive transition considerations for banks and for that matter, for federal agencies, bank regulatory agencies that have to rethink and redo all of their compliance examinations. There's some talk among bank trade associations that they may try to sue or do something else to block the implementation of the rule. It is conceivable that if there is a Republican president in 2025 as a result of the 2024 elections, that a Republican White House may seek to undo or redo this whole process. All that's really hard to game out. The bottom line is this is a very consequential rulemaking. Banks and other stakeholders, including HFAs, will be making adjustments based on what this rule currently says. And the full analysis of it will be something that we continue to do and keep everyone informed of over the next several weeks and months. Next slide. I also just wanted to mention for those of you in the rental side of your agencies, and certainly that's an area where ProLink provides a lot of amazing services to HFAs. NCSHA has spent more than a year revising our recommended practices in housing credit administration. These are voluntary consensus standards in all aspects of underwriting, allocation, compliance, all areas that state agencies are responsible for in delivering the low-income housing tax credit program. This latest round of recommended practices was approved by NCSHA's board of directors at our annual conference, at their meeting at our annual conference a month ago. Everything, including a good summary, is available on NCSHA's website. About half of the existing recommended practices were revised, in most cases significantly. Areas of focus in the revisions include the key issues that we're all dealing with: rising costs, preservation needs, citing considerations as they relate to equity and opportunity, as well as increasing disaster risk. And this time around, the recommended practices added a very important new practice. It's really several items under one rubric dealing with renter protections. And that is something that has clearly become a more focal issue in multifamily housing and policy and practice. And the recommended practices reflect a number of areas where housing finance agencies can play a constructive role through their housing credit programs in ensuring renter protections. Next slide. I wanted to touch on the Home-ARP program. Many of you know that in the American Rescue Plan, one of the big COVID relief bills that passed in March of 2021, there was a special $5 billion appropriation of home funds, which is not exactly right. $5 billion was provided under the rubric of the Home Investment Partnerships Program, but with a number of very specific differences from the annual home program that we've all come to know since 1992. So the main idea is that this $5 billion is through the home mechanism, if you will, but it's really focused on preventing homelessness and providing services to those at greatest risk of becoming homeless. Those of you involved in this in your agencies know you had to do elaborate plans for HUD's approval, which has happened. And these funds, while they were provided as part of a pandemic relief package, are authorized until 2030. And as Home, as you all know, has several years for each appropriation to spend out. We think these funds will be increasingly useful to housing finance agencies over the next several years as they deal with homelessness and related issues, which are becoming more common in just about every state that I visit. Next slide. Whether you look at the raw numbers of folks who are becoming homeless or at risk of it, or the prevalence of encampments in so many cities and communities around the country, there's no question that homelessness is sort of on the radar for housing finance agencies and the housing system in a way that I'm not sure it has been maybe since the 80s, maybe ever. And housing finance agencies' core programs, the ones that you all run day in and day out, are increasingly being asked to respond. And the federal government is putting more attention on the issue. Just last week, there was a big announcement that the Interagency Council on Homelessness was developing a new initiative with the Department of Health and Human Services to really push the envelope on freeing up Medicaid funds for housing services. This is something that's been around for a number of years. A few housing finance agencies have actually already done this, but there's more opportunity there, particularly to serve folks who are most vulnerable, whether homeless or at the risk of experiencing homelessness. And so that is just one area where I think you'll see federal policy as well as state policy increasingly focus on homelessness. So programs like that Home-ARP that I mentioned are going to be critically important for housing finance agencies over the next several years. Next slide. I think we just have two more, and everyone participating, and certainly the team at ProLink knows much more than I do about the state of implementation. But in terms of HOTMA and NSPIRE, first with HOTMA, you all know that this was a 2016 federal law that took several years for HUD to promulgate the regulations for. That has now generally happened, and we are awaiting guidance from CPD on some of the specific ins and outs as they relate to home and the Housing Trust Fund, and from the IRS as they relate to housing credit. This gives me a good opportunity, of course, to plug the HFA Institute, which NCSHA convenes every year in January and will be again in January 2024. You all have seen that information. It's on our website. These are the kinds of questions and issues that we bring HUD and IRS staff to you all, to the housing finance agency staff running these programs, to address in the room in a candid setting. And so there's more work to be done there. I think our sense is the responsiveness has been pretty good, although, you know, not always as timely as we would hope. We understand that our many friends in these agencies do have a set of rules and procedures they have to follow in terms of how they can engage and respond. And our experience at NCSHA is that for the most part, they're terrific. And while it can be frustrating that it takes as long as it does sometimes to get the answers we need, they are usually forthcoming. Next slide, please. And that's NSPIRE. I think you all will be spending time on this at other points during this virtual symposium. This was a major change. The first time in decades that HUD had really updated its physical inspection standards. Those of you who've been doing this for a while know that, you know, there was perhaps more of an emphasis on appearance and not as much on health and safety in HUD-assisted, HUD-funded properties under the inspection standards. That's now been rectified. There have been some bumps in getting out the full details on compliance from HUD. We're continuing to encourage HUD to be in dialogue with you all. There's big implications for your technology as well, of course, and your systems as well as what's expected of your staff. And we again are waiting in particular for more guidance from the IRS about how the NSPIRE standards are going to affect housing credit properties with HUD funding. That's another issue that will be covered in depth at the HFA Institute. That is an awful lot of technical information and wonky jargon, hopefully not too much. I do just want to say before I turn it back how we continue at NCSHA just to be amazed at the dedication and productivity of Housing Finance Agency staff. It's really just our joy to work for you in Washington, D.C., and you really do inspire us in your commitment and your service to the people of your states. So I hope you all have a terrific rest of this virtual event. I know you're going to learn a lot from each other and from the team at ProLink, and look forward to seeing many of you at the HFA Institute.
Stockton, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We did end this session a bit early. Is there anything else related to NCSHA that you held back on sharing that you might want to take the opportunity to share for the next couple minutes? I have a couple questions too.
I'm sorry, I was reaching for my clock there. I've got as much time as you all want to spend. There's always more going on. So a couple of things that we didn't put slides together in because we wasn't sure whether we would have time. So big topic, energy. As many of you know, in legislation that passed over the past couple of years, especially a bill called the Inflation Reduction Act, hundreds of billions of dollars in grants and incentives and loan guarantees were approved by Congress and are starting to flow through a number of different federal agencies to encourage adoption of renewable energy and energy efficiency throughout the economy. In all aspects of society. A lot of this money is targeted at the housing sector, at single family and multifamily buildings. And most of that money is at least somewhat aimed at low and moderate income occupied homes and apartments. Now, it's, as I mentioned, it's flowing through a number of different new programs and agencies that we don't necessarily deal with as much in our work at NCSHA, like the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of Energy. There are also programs running through HUD and Treasury. But in any event, early on, we recognized through a task force of state HFA executive directors that these programs really might end up being the biggest sources of new funding for affordable housing construction and development over the next few years, even bigger than programs through HUD and USDA and Treasury that we're all familiar with. That's how large amounts of money we're talking about. Over the last year or so, we've been heavily engaged at lobbying on the regulations and the policy approach that all these various agencies are taking. We have seen, and HFAs and their partners have responded to a number of different notices of funding availability. And by the first, maybe second quarter of 2024, we are going to start to see where this money is going. And based on what we have observed from housing finance agencies in applying directly for funds, in applying as part of teams for these programs, we expect a substantial amount of this energy efficiency and solar incentive funding will make its way through housing finance agencies into mostly multifamily, but also single family owner-occupied homes that HFAs finance. So that is a big area. There's a lot to learn, and kind of master these new programs and their regulations, but a lot of interest as always among HFAs, and that's certainly something that we're going to continue to support.
Great, thank you. So I have a couple questions to share that have come in. One of them is related to a bullet on average income set, the average income slide you covered. So NCSHA working on developing additional recommendations on average income test in nonprofit right of first refusal. Can you share more about that bullet?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question. It's coming from someone who really knows the housing credit program and this recommended practices exercise. So I mentioned that the revisions to our recommended practices affected about half of the existing ones and added a new multi-part one on renter protections. There were two other issues that when the task force got going, it thought it would be able to address. One was the average income test that was enacted in law a few years ago and is now finally in workable regulations. And the other was the nonprofit right of first refusal provision of the housing credit statute. And in both cases, the task force that led the development of these recommended practices determined that more time is going to be needed to fully address some with recommended practices. And they were for two different reasons. In the case of the average income test, as the questioner may well know, the first effort by Treasury and IRS to write regulations to implement this provision of the statute were totally unworkable. And NCSHA and really every other advocacy group in the housing credit program really objected to them. IRS and Treasury, to their great credit, went back really to square one, revised them, didn't release them in time for there to be the kind of familiarity and adoption among agencies and developers and investors to really know what recommended practices should look like when it comes to using the average income. This is a great flexibility. It'll allow for more mixed income housing credit developments. We think will facilitate tougher deals in markets that have had a harder time penciling out, but it's just still so early in the experience of the industry and its participants under the new regulations, which came out less than a year ago. So we're just going to wait and see what does start to emerge in terms of key issues and HFA responses before we think about some recommended practices in that area. With respect to the right of first refusal, this is not a contentious issue in a lot of states, but in some it's enormously problematic. There are cases of real estate firms coming in using very strong arm negotiating and acquisition strategies and pushing out the nonprofit sponsor of housing credit properties with the express purpose of trying to squeeze out all the financial value, which can be considerable towards the end of the 15-year compliance period. This is a practice that's operated largely because the tax credit statute written in 86, revised in 89, never contemplated that low-income housing tax credit properties would be highly economically valuable real estate assets. But because many of them are in areas where rents and property values have substantially increased, most of them are in superb physical condition, in part because of what developers and landlords have done and state HFAs have done to ensure that has happened. That created a problematic scenario in some states. NCSHA has been trying to get this fixed through the legislative process to just clarify what we think is always the law's intent regarding nonprofits' ability to fully exercise their right of first refusal. We need to see more progress in the legislative front before recommended practice can really be fully adopted, because there is still so much uncertainty. But we're going to continue to have a conversation about what we might be able to do in terms of encouraging states that are concerned about proliferation of this kind of activity I talked about, to be able to at least take actions that states on their own who have experienced this have been able to do. And so whether those ultimately become recommended practices or simply examples that that we can point to states that are interested in doing more until we get the statutory change we need, we'll just have to see.
Interesting. The next one that I have is, did the CRA reform address online banking where banks don't have physical bank branches?
Yeah, it did. And I'm sorry if I might have glossed over that a little quickly, but the new CRA regs do allow banks to get credit, and also, they hold banks accountable to some extent for community development lending services and investing in areas where they don't have a physical presence, but do have customers. So the relevant sections of the reg, and I'm happy to send these to the person who submitted the question, would be in the discussion of what they call assessment areas. That's where most of this is. But it was a pretty big step forward. And while it sounds, and was, to be clear, to NCSHA, self-evident that the new rules should do this, and we were among many who recommended it, not everybody did. Mm-hmm. There were some commentators, some interests in the banking sector who said, CRA was a place-based rule intended to deal with the physical location of bank branches, period. That's what the law was for. That's what the law says. CRA is all about. So it wasn't like a no-brainer for the regulators to come down where they did, and it'll be interesting to see what the actual effects are in implementation.
Thank you. So one or two left. So one of the questions is, of the additional recommendations that was just released from NCSHA, is there any notable recommendations that has not been released in the past, or anything that you would share related to that? Well,
I think what the question may be getting at is what's sort of the most new, and absolutely, it's the brand new area on renter protections. Okay. That is all brand new. The recommended practices have never spoken to that, and I definitely would encourage anyone who's interested to go to our website and read the full-blown recommendations, or if you just want to see a summary of what they did, take a look at those, because they do represent a significant expansion and are really the first time that the recommended practices have dealt with renter protections.
Great. We appreciate that as a software vendor. Those kinds of assets really help inform our work as well. The last one is, will NCSHA, the Institute, HFA Institute, have any sessions on NSPIRE and HOTMA in the January-February conference? I think it's January.
Oh yeah, we will have multiple sessions on these. Who knows, we may have awesome technology firms who are wonderful members of NCSHA speaking about implementation, and we will definitely have the key federal agencies in the room: HUD, Treasury, IRS, USDA, as their programs relate to and interact with HOTMA and NSPIRE.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions that have come in. We so appreciate you being with us this morning, Stockton. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Hope you all have a great rest of your event. I look forward to seeing many of you at the Institute.
Okay, we'll see you there. ProLink will be there. I'm going to stay on for just a couple minutes with you guys to do some housekeeping as we kind of wrap up this session and start our next one. So thank you for joining this first session to kick us off. I hope you found it valuable in what was covered today by Stockton. Please submit any questions or thoughts that you might have, and we will certainly follow up with you as well. As a reminder, a copy of the PowerPoint is available here. We have that screen shared with you right now. Circling, I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen, but in the top right-hand corner, we're circling the resources link, which is available on your right-hand side of your screen as well. And that's where that PowerPoint presentation can be accessed. You can also come back and watch the recording of this session at any time, even after the conference is over. You're able to log back up for, I think, for 90 days. It's open to log back in and watch this session. So please remember that and take advantage of that. There's also a survey link, so you can see that available. It's the last link on that right-hand side of your screen. Please provide any feedback that you might have on this session, and you can, that's another place other than the chat where you can enter any outstanding questions you might have that were not answered during this session, and we can follow up. Okay, so now for the next, I think I'm going to play our coffee and bagel video as we're kind of wrapping up this session and preparing for our next one so that you guys can see again how to access that. But then once we hit the top of the hour at 10 Mountain, that's noon Eastern, we'll have 15 minutes until our 12 p.m. Eastern time session begins, and that's where we will be joining Coffee and Bagel. So again, those are just virtual rooms and we'll be highlighting it's really whoever comes into those rooms first gets to join that group of 6, and then we'll start another room of 6. And so it's a mix of individuals that you'll be able to meet with. The way that you access Coffee and Bagel is by clicking the discussions item that's circled here on the screen. So underneath the community tab menu at the top of your screen, there should be a discussions link. Click that and you'll find rooms set up. There's like 6 little boxes appear. You just click into one of those and that's how you join a room. Each room accommodates 6. And then you'll just wait. If you happen to be the first one in the room, you'll wait and others will join once they get in there. And you can just start discussing with your peers and see what's up with everybody. So please meet and greet each other until the next session begins. The next panel is going to be Average Income, featuring Kelly Insinias, who is our HFA Senior Product Manager for ProLink Solutions. She's going to be the moderator. We also have Erica Etterling from Virginia Housing, Matt Luna from Yardi, and Bailey Chambers from Mercy Housing joining as panelists. So that'll be a great session to join next. That again begins at 12:15 Eastern Time. Coffee and Bagel will take place every break throughout the conference. And during each break time, those 15 minutes, we will be picking one winner to provide a $50 gift card to. That's some of the screens or images you saw during that video. This is just to promote participation in those sessions and get people to socialize. And one more thing I wanted to share is we are planning on hosting our user group meeting at HFAI. So that is in the works right now. I'm working with Stockton's team to organize a user group meeting during the Institute conference in January. So I will have more information on that following our own conference here today. So enjoy the break, and I will see you for our next session. Thank you.